What's cracking, everybody? You're back with Mr. Berger, and tonight we're going to be taking a look at this new version of a pretty classic Splashyard deck. Now, the major thing that I wanted to point out with this deck is that the BOWLER is back in play. Now, BOWLER is a really interesting card. It's seen a resurgence recently, and it was unpopular for a long time. It was really popular for a while back in the day, back before there were so many multiple replacements that cost a similar amount of elixir or played a similar role, such as like the Executioner or so on and so forth. So the BOWLER, although he fell off the map for the longest time, he didn't get any real direct buffs lately, but he's seen a definite noticeable resurgence lately because I think there's been a resurgence of more and more witches. The witch buff, the buff to the witches. The fact that she spawns so many more skeletons so much more quickly makes BOWLER a really good option to shut her down because he's really slow, he's really tanky, stays alive for a long time, completely shuts down all her skeletons and pushes her back and kind of messes with her and does a really good job of destroying her as well. His damage is pretty significant. So the BOWLER, I think that's the reason that we've been seeing more and more of him lately, is because there's been more and more witches. So sometimes you'll notice that although certain cards don't necessarily receive direct buffs, they may find a particular presence again, or for the first time, in the meta, because they may be, maybe like they're counters to something that did get buffed, or something that's really popular right now. This being a great example of that. So this Splashyard archetype, like I mentioned, it was strong for a while, and there's been a lot of variations of it, and I'm not a really big fan of this archetype. I have not been a big fan of Graveyard ever since it came out. I remember when it came out, and it just didn't fit me very well. It was high risk, high reward, it was really easy to counter, and I don't know, guys, it wasn't for me. And the more and more I've played it, the more I've gotten used to it, and I actually do enjoy it now. It is a really solid win condition, and if you know how to play it properly, it can be quite difficult to counter. So I've grown to love it in a way, but there's still a lot of other decks and archetypes that, I would rather play than this. Now, that being said, this particular variation of the Splashyard or even the Graveyard archetype, I like it a lot. I found that this one, it fits me well, and I enjoy playing it. So I've been doing pretty well with it. It took me a second to get the hang of it, and I think I'm going to do a few more runs with it because it's pretty fun, and it's like relatively new in the sense that there's a lot of cards in there, or at least card combinations that you don't see a lot, like the BOWLER, and then you got the Ice Wizard in there too, you got 2 Wizards in there, you got Tornado back in there, so on and so forth. But we'll talk about all of those different cards in a little bit. So the Splashyard archetype, although I wasn't a big fan of it originally, I like this variation. So that's kind of the main thing that I'm trying to explain there. Now, this variation, I think I found it on Royale API. I definitely searched the websites, like Stats Royale, Deckshop.pro, and Royale API from time to time, try to get some insight on the decks that are currently at play. And I like to try challenge runs on decks that are really popular and try to cover them, figure them out first of all, maybe watch a video or two on them to get a few tips from other YouTubers or other players, or sometimes just jump right into the fray. And that's what I did with this one. I kind of had an idea of how to play the Splashyard kind of archetype, and I was like, alright, I'm just going to whip this deck together because it was like the second most played deck in Grand Challenges at the moment when I searched for it a few days ago, and yeah, I've been liking it a lot. So that being said, if you're looking at the card list, you'll notice, yeah, it's fun, but it's not very free-to-play friendly, and that's another thing that I cover a lot on my channel, is free-to-play friendly decks, because if you didn't know, I'm a free-to-play friendly player. Apparently Clash with Ash didn't know that. I commented on one of his videos, and he's like, oh, I had no idea you were fully free-to-play, and I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm almost level 13, I haven't spent a cent on this game at this point, and, it's one of those games where you can get pretty much everything, except for maybe like emotes and stuff, by just investing more time into the game. So I'm going to get it all eventually, and that's kind of the mentality that I go through it. So the reason that I'm mentioning that again is because that gives me more incentive to cover the free-to-play decks and cater to the free-to-play audience. So this is not necessarily one of those decks. It's not for people who don't have a lot of cards unlocked. It's not for playing on ladder without a max account, so on and so forth. It's definitely good for classic challenges and grand challenges, though, if you do have all the cards. Now, there's definitely a lot of splash damage in this deck, so let's start talking about the kind of intricacies of the deck itself, and then we'll jump into card replacements. So that's why you have this concept of, or this wording of a Splashyard deck rather than just oh, this is a graveyard or this is a beatdown deck. You got that splash damage from the Ice Wizard. You got it from the Royal Ghost. You got it from the Bowler. You also have AoE from Poison technically. The Electro Wizards enter the arena effect, and even the Tornado. So practically every single card in your deck has some sort of splash damage. And the only one that's the exception, of course, is the Graveyard. That's the major win condition itself. Synergizes really well with all of this. So that being said, that's the reason that you see the Tornado in there, because of course Tornado synergizes really well with anything that has splash damage, allowing you to pull a bunch of enemy units into the center and then wreck them all at once with all your splash units. So one thing that I've noticed about this particular variation is there isn't really like any sort of a tank or a mini tank. In a lot of graveyard decks that I play, it's kind of like almost a beatdown deck. Like I've done giant beatdown graveyard decks. I've done like kind of cycly graveyard decks with Ice Golem, graveyard freeze decks with mini tank in there too. This one doesn't have any real mini tank. I don't know. I guess the Royal Ghost is kind of a mini tank, but he's not as beefy and doesn't play that same role as like a Knight or even a Valk at this point, because she's really beefy. I just learned that Valk has more HP than BOWLER, dude. That blew my mind. Oh man. Or like an Ice Golem, so on and so forth. So you don't have any like particular, from what I've noticed, particular, how would I say this? What card would you want to combo with that graveyard? Generally you want that tank in there. So with this deck, it took me a while to figure out like which card do I want to use to tank for that graveyard when it's going in. Now the BOWLER is really beefy, so although you don't have a mini tank, you can use the BOWLER kind of as a mini tank. He's got a lot of health, and ultimately I found from playing this deck that you don't really need one so much. You can just kind of have the support of like your E-Wiz or your Ice Wizard or even the Royal Ghost or the BOWLER, or just about anything comboed with the graveyard at the right timing when they don't have a cycle in hand, or comboed with the graveyard poison, which I'll talk about in a second here. You can generally do a ton of damage to a tower, or completely take it out. So although this doesn't have a primary mini tank, it works out. Trust me. Give it a try. Let me know what you think. Now this deck plays a lot like a control deck. So what that means is that you're going to control the board. I always say that because I am a Hearthstone player. I guess it's not really the board in this game, it's more like the battlefield. So what you want to do is kind of play defense and then go for that really prime opportunity to go for a big push down the lane, get the graveyard up, and just absolutely wreck your opponent's tower. Generally you can play a hard defense to try to catch them off guard, like I'm doing here. I got the BOWLER and I got the E-Wiz going in there, and then I send in the graveyard there. And of course the poison comboed with the graveyard makes it so that whatever he's using to counter my graveyard pretty much dies or takes a ton of damage from the poison. And on top of that, the poison is chipping away at the Princess Tower, and the graveyard is spawning a bunch of skeletons, some of which are getting 1 or 2 swings off in the tower, doing even more chip damage there. So every time you send that combo in with something to support it, you're guaranteed, well not guaranteed, but almost guaranteed, at least a little bit of chip damage to them. I think even if they put a poison down, there's a chance you get 1 or 2 skeleton swings off. Alright, so talking about that, again, let's just recap. Play defense, build a counter push, send in your graveyard poison combo, take down the tower. So go play this deck, play it like a control deck for sure. What I want to mention too, of course, is I want to stress that you want to save your poison for your graveyard combo. And you'll notice that when I was explaining, the strategies a second ago, I kept saying like you want to save your poison and your graveyard for when you've got some sort of support. And the reason, again, for that is the poison clears out the way for the graveyard. Whatever they're going to use to counter the graveyard, your poison will pretty much destroy it or do a bunch of damage to it, chip away at the Princess Tower, so on and so forth. So even if it doesn't completely wreck their counter, like if they put down a Skeleton Army or Goblin Gang, it's golden for you, because your poison will just take it out in a second or two, right? But if they put something else down, like earlier you saw I put like an E-Wiz and a Valkyrie down, it'll also destroy those things over time. It won't completely immediately shut them down, giving your skeletons free reign to do a ton of damage, but it will definitely provide a lot of value by doing a ton of damage to his support units there. So save that poison for the graveyard. Now, of course, if you're going up against graveyard, and I think I do have a match in one of these replays where I'm going up against another graveyard deck, then you can also use your poison defensively. Poison is an awesome option to counter a graveyard. If you poison right in the center of where they place their graveyard, and pretty much as soon as their skeletons spawn, the poison is going to completely wreck them. And I don't recall off the top of my head if the timers are different or the same anymore. I think that the poison is like slightly shorter, like 8 seconds to graveyards, 10 seconds or something like that. But, you know, it takes a second or two for the skeletons to start spawning and pop up and everything. So pretty much if you lay the poison down on top of that, it'll completely shut down the graveyard. So save it for your graveyard offensively, or use it defensively against their graveyard if you're going up against some sort of a mirror match or something like that. Alright, now I was going to stress this, but I already stressed it so many times, I'll just repeat it really quickly. You generally want a graveyard once you have some support going across the bridge. The BOWLER is pretty tanky, right guys? So BOWLER can be the mini tank if you need him to, but just about anything else works. The Royal Ghost will work out great, the E-Wiz works out great, the Ice Wiz works out great. You know, just try different things, see how it goes. Now, talking about those two wizards, well, look at this. BOWLER doesn't die to lightning. Love it. Anyway, talking about those two wizards, one thing that you do need to look out for is you want to make sure not to let them both die to the same fireball or rocket or even lightning. You know what I mean? So this is something that I learned. I can't remember where I read it. I read it somewhere online, and somebody gave the recommendation like you don't want to run Ice Wiz and E-Wiz or E-Wiz and Wizard in the same deck, because then they can just fireball them both. And I was like, okay, that's a good point, because for the longest time I was running a P.E.K.K.A deck. It was a big old P.E.K.K.A beatdown deck, and this is when I was much more of a beginner player. And it worked out really well, but I was running Ice Wiz and Wizard, and my concept behind it was like, okay, P.E.K.K.A, Tornado, Ice Wiz, E-Wiz, you got the big P.E.K.K.A swinging and doing a bunch of, you know, melee single target damage, and then you got all that synergy from all the AoE damage between the two wizards, and of course the Tornado, right? Like the Tornado right there. And I actually found that to be relatively true. Oftentimes the Ice Wiz and the E-Wiz would come together behind the P.E.K.K.A, and then they would be susceptible to being countered like by a single Valkyrie or by a single Fireball or something like that. But then as I advanced more and more and became a more experienced player and started watching more YouTube videos and reading more strategies and things like that, you know, I became much more familiar with the concept of spell bait. And in this deck, in a lot of decks, that's what you want to do, is you want them to fireball one of your wizards or your musketeer or your hunter so that you can safely place down the more expensive or stronger option. So like if he fireballs my Ice Wiz, it's not a big deal because then I can use the E-Wiz and it's a negative trade because Ice Wiz only costs 3, right? So that being said, there isn't really any particular strategy with this one. Like you're not going for any massive spell bait like, oh, you always want him to fireball your Ice Wiz, never play your E-Wiz. No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that do be careful for the susceptibility of your Ice Wiz and your E-Wiz being, I'm stuttering here, being susceptible to the same spell, right? So you don't want them both to be hit by the same fireball. So be careful about placing them where they're going to run into the same path and then end up standing right next to each other, supporting whatever's in front of them, and then they get fireballed or Valkyried or whatever, right? So just watch out for that, you know, keep that in mind. BOWLER's beefier, has slightly different range, so you don't have to worry as much about him. Of course, Royal Ghost is melee. Just watch out for those two wizards, because they have similar range, similar HP, so on and so forth. Now, let's talk about card replacements. Again, guys, there's a lot of legendaries in this deck, so I wanted to offer a bunch of different card replacements for just about everything in the deck. And this particular variation is what's really strong right now, due to the current meta and, you know, a lot of different reasons. You know, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, the BOWLER being good because of the witch heavy meta, right? So this variation is really good for, you know, little intricate reasons like that. But if you want to just play like a Splashyard deck, there's a lot of fun versions of it. Like I play one on my alt account, the one that I'm using to record this video actually. Not the one that I used for these replays though. Anyway, I play one on this account with Giant and with Baby Dragon, because those are my two highest level cards on this account. I've been requesting them from day one with this account. So it works out really well. I've got the Graveyard in there, I've got the Tornado, I got the Giant, I got the Baby Dragon. Giant tanks the Princess Tower while the Graveyard just absolutely obliterates the tower. Then you got that, you know, Splash NATO synergy, and I got a Princess in there too, and she's got splash damage. So there's a lot of different variations of it. So let's talk about card replacements. Now if you don't have the Ice Wizard, you might want to go with something else that has splash damage, you know, like an Executioner, but the thing is, the advantage of the Ice Wizard is that he's so cheap. He only costs 3 elixir, so he's a very cheap, reliable, kind of unique support card. He's relatively beefy, and he has that slow on every attack. He's got a very small AoE, so he's got a lot of unique traits, or not fully unique, but relatively unique traits. But if you do need to replace him, you could go with just like archers, because they also only cost 3. They're also pretty beefy. You know, they don't die to zap, right? They don't die to log. So if you don't have Ice Wiz, you could probably go with just some other relatively cheap support card, like Musketeer or Archers. That's what I would say to do in this particular case. Now for the Bowler, I would say Executioner, honestly. I think that Executioner is kind of a go-to replacement for Bowler. He plays a similar role. He's got that long range. He's got splash damage. He is beefy. You know, he doesn't die to Fireball, right? Executioner does die to Rocket, whereas Bowler doesn't, but hey, Executioner can also attack air. And that synergizes really well with your Tornado. There's a whole bunch of XZ-NATO decks out there. And the Tornado's been nerfed a number of times and it's kind of fallen off the map because of that, but you still see it in quite a number of decks, this being one of them. Alright, so that would be my replacement for the Bowler, probably the Executioner. If you don't want to do that, maybe even the Valkyrie right now, because Valkyrie is just so strong. She costs almost the same elixir, and she is really beefy like the Bowler. She has more HP than him, and she has got that splash damage and plays the mini tank role. So that's another really good replacement. Guys, just put Valkyrie in about any deck. Valkyrie is so strong right now. Just slap her in your deck, alright? Okay, next, Inferno Dragon. A good replacement for Inferno Dragon, generally a go-to for me, would be like Mega Minion. If you want to do Inferno Tower and go for a defensive structure, I mean, be my guest. But that's not going to synergize with, you know, these big offensive pushes. The Inferno Dragon is kind of your tank killer in this deck, so the tower might actually be a pretty decent replacement. Otherwise, you would go with Mega Minion, because he costs a similar amount. He costs a little bit less, 3 instead of 4, and he plays a similar role. He's kind of like a high damage dealer, relatively tanky, slow-moving, flying unit. Now, what about the Ewiz? Probably another support card. If you have Zappies leveled up, I think Zappies are always a fun replacement for Ewiz. They don't have that same Enter the Arena effect, but they do have that stun effect. You know, they stun every time that they attack. So they can interrupt Inferno Towers and Inferno Dragons and lock units down. You know, they're pretty cool. They're an interesting card. So that would be my go-to replacement for the Ewiz. Otherwise, just another support card, you know, like the Wizard or the Musketeer or the Archers again. Wizard was really strong after he got buffed. I haven't been seeing him as much lately, but I do think that he's still a pretty viable card. Maybe not so much a tournament standard level, but hey, who knows? Look, there's one right there, right? So he must be decent. Alright, now next would be the Royal Ghost. Now the Royal Ghost, there's a lot of replacements. Royal Ghost has a lot of very unique abilities. You know, his unique invisibility trait. He's got that splash damage. He goes back to being invisible. You know, he can kill fire and ice spirits before they jump on him because of his invisibility. I mean, he's kind of beefy like a knight, so my replacements would probably be things that are relatively beefy as well. Kind of another mini tank like a knight or an ice golem maybe. Another really good replacement for the Ghost is the Dark Prince, because it is a mini tank 2 in a way, with that shield and the relatively high health pool, and it has splash damage similar to the Royal Ghost. It costs a similar amount of elixir. It's another melee troop. It doesn't have that unique invisibility, but if you don't have the Royal Ghost, that would be one of the best replacements, I think. You could go Valkyrie again, if you don't have anything here. Put a Valkyrie in there, because Valkyrie is so strong right now. Plays a similar role. She's splash damage, costs a similar amount of elixir. You know, a slow-moving melee unit. They cost 4 instead of 3, and just wreck swarms. So I think those would be my go-to replacements for the Royal Ghost. Now, for the Poison, you could do Fireball or Arrows, but Poison, hands down, is the best spell to synergize with Graveyard. And I went extensively into the reasons why, so I don't need to go over it again. But if you missed it, you know, go back to earlier in the video, and I'll give you a bunch of reasons why Poison is the reason that you want to go for, the one that you want to go for with that Graveyard. But if you don't have your Poison leveled up, you could try to run Fireball. I have seen some Fireball Graveyard decks, and you know, they're not too bad. You just predict a Fireball, whatever they're gonna use to counter your Graveyard, or you just use it for that little bit of extra chip damage once, and you know, kill whatever they've put down to counter once it's down. Now for the Graveyard, sorry guys, but there isn't really any replacement. I would say go with another major win condition, but that would change the deck. You know, maybe like a hog or even like a skeleton barrel might be kind of fun because it's kind of similar. But it's just, this whole deck is built around the graveyard. So it's like, you know, if you take out the hog from a hog cycle deck, it's no longer a hog cycle deck. It's still a cycle deck, yeah, but it's not a hog cycle deck. So take the graveyard out of this, yeah, there's still a lot of splash damage, but you don't have that graveyard in there, and you don't have that, you know, Splashyard synergy. So if you put something else in there, it really changes the deck. So I would not replace the graveyard with anything else. I'd probably look for another deck if you're going to try to not run the graveyard. And if you absolutely love everything about this deck except the graveyard, throw in another win condition, you know, like a hog, or maybe even like a giant, you know, some sort of a tank like that. Maybe even a golem, that'd be fun. Alright, but now I'm getting off topic here. What I'm trying to say is don't replace the graveyard, right? Okay, lastly, for the tornado, maybe something like defensive structure, like a Tesla or a cannon. Tesla's really strong right now, so you could definitely run with the Tesla if you wanted. But if you don't like the Tesla, you'd rather run the cannon or even the Inferno Tower, hey, be my guest, go right ahead. So that would probably be my go-to replacement for the tornado. Alright guys, this is getting to be a long video, but you know, I haven't done this in a while. I really wanted to share a loss. It's hard for me to go back and look at my losses, but it's good. It's good for all of us to do that and see where we made mistakes, how we could have done things better. Sometimes you just get tilted and make a bunch of poor decisions, and sometimes you can see like, oh, I should have put my Valk one spot to the left, that would have worked better, and learn from that, right? So here we can see that I kind of makeshift defended in the left there. I was a little bit late to react. I do completely shut down the left push there, so that works out okay. And I'm going up against like a P.E.K.K.A. Battle Round deck with Dark Prince in there too, so it's almost like a bridge spam deck with P.E.K.K.A. in there. Pretty deadly. So for this replay, I've talked about all the strategies and card replacements that I wanted to mention and all of that. So I want to focus more on, you know, the decision making and where I went wrong and how I could have done things better. So here I use the Inferno Dragon there, and unfortunately he has E-Wiz, and I can't recall if I've seen E-Wiz yet at this point. I don't think he had used it yet. If he had, then that was my mistake and I just missed it again. But E-Wiz of course shuts down the Inferno Dragon, and the placement was relatively poor. I was hoping that the P.E.K.K.A. would, you know, move down towards the bridge and then waltz its way across the bridge and then back down towards the tower, and the Inferno Dragon would have plenty of time to shut her down, but it didn't work out so well. I actually used the graveyard in defense there, and you can see that the graveyard completely shuts down the P.E.K.K.A. and the E-Wiz, so that works out really well. Now, I want to interrupt his charges, so I actually use my E-Wiz. I don't want to place him right in front there, because then he'll just die to the Dark Prince's charge, so I place him kind of off to the side. Of course, when I pull those guys all away with the tornado, then the bandit locks onto my E-Wiz. So there, that right there was probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made, was the positioning that I allowed the bandit to have with that tornado kind of played against me, because then she was able to charge onto my Electro Wizard. That's unfortunate, but hey, it is what it is. Alright, so next we got the P.E.K.K.A. coming down. So at this point I'm like, alright, Inferno Dragon, of course, and I'm ready for that E-Wiz, so I need to put something down to counter it, but I don't make the best play. I use the poison. It actually works out pretty well, but unfortunately the Inferno Dragon is already dead, so I kind of try to pull the P.E.K.K.A. away from my King Tower with that tornado there, and it actually pulls her close enough to my E-Wiz to destroy him, so now he's not able to provide any sort of a counter push in the opposite, in the right lane there. Right now he's definitely playing like a bridge spam deck. He's trying to put heavy pressure in the left lane, and he knows that if he can keep applying pressure in either lane pretty much, then I won't be able to build up any sort of a big push. And I'm kind of feeling that too right now. Like I defended really well against his push, but he knows he only has 20 seconds left in the match that he needs to defend through, and there's no way that I can build up a big enough push in time to be able to take out that tower. And I kind of desperately used the graveyard and the poison there, and I know that's not going to be enough, but hey, I was like, why not? You never know, right? Give it a try, and it's not enough. So there's definitely a few mistakes that I made there, guys, and we all make mistakes. And looking back at this match again, after, you know, a couple times watching it and running through it with my personal commentary here and everything, I see some of those mistakes that I made, and hopefully the next time that I'm playing I can take them to, well, to heart, I guess, right? Heart. And in my mind and my brain too, and learn from them and not make the same mistakes again. You know, sometimes you make the same mistakes over and over, but eventually you progress and become a better player and find alternate ways to handle those situations that are causing you to make those mistakes. At least ideally, right? That's how we get better. Alright guys, that is it for this new meta Splashyard BOWLER back in the meta deck. I love it. Make sure that you do all that stereotypical YouTube stuff, and like and comment down there, and subscribe by hitting the Berger. You know, I love responding to comments, and I've been getting more and more, so I appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and have a good night.